the networking component of it, right? You have hour-long conversations with all these guests. Most of these guests that I have on are much smarter than I am. They've done bigger things than I have. And so I get to, ask them questions that I have. So not only do I get to learn, but after the hour conversation, it's like, well, I've built a genuine connection with this individual, and you never know what opportunities or doors that's going to open up to you down the road.
Yeah.
Right? Because someone's been on your podcast, you're going to exchange phone numbers with them. You're going to exchange contact information. If you ever need to hit them up down the road, they're going to answer your phone call.
Yeah.
Because you provided value to them by bringing them on to your podcast, exposing them to a listener base and audience. And so in return, they're going to know who you are. They're going to take your phone call if you ever need anything. And I think that's a powerful thing. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of The Report Saturday edition. And I got my co-host, Miss Alex Johnson. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. How's it going today?
It is going amazing. It's been a super fun and productive week. And we got Halloween weekend this weekend. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's been busy. I was just thinking, where's the time go? Thursday, we've been doing a lot this week. It's gone by quickly, but I think it's been really productive.
Yep. You went to the Haunted Trails of Balboa Park last night with Samantha. How did that go?
It was really fun. It was very scary. I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was just going to be like this trail with people popping out. And I don't like scary things. I don't watch scary movies. I don't listen to scary podcasts. I don't do any of that. And we were kind of anxiously excited, but yeah, it was really cool, really well put together. I highly recommend it.
I went on Friday night last weekend. It was super cool. What was the highlight for you?
There was this school bus that you had to walk through, and people were popping out at you. You didn't know who was real, who was fake. And it was just very real, they do a really good job. I think that was the scariest, coolest part.
I really like the school bus as well. But for me, I think my favorite was there's this bed that was moving.
Oh, yeah.
And this lady was on the bed strapped to it, and it was just super creepy.
It's exorcism type thing.
That's exactly what it was.
That was weird.
That was weird, but oddly that was my favorite part of the whole maze.
Yeah. And then the hotel part was cool.
The hotel part was really cool. But yeah, if any of the listeners are ever in San Diego, I guess it's probably going to be next year. But the Haunted Trails of Balboa Park, definitely super fun. But yeah, I'm fuck, this year is going by so quick. We got another hotel officially under contract. It's the one up north. And, going into this last couple of months, I was looking forward to kind of cleaning up some loose ends for the business, so we can go into the new year fresh and ready to hit the ground running. But, you never know when opportunities are going to hit your desk, and this one's too good to pass up. So excited for it, but we're going to be busy closing out the end of the year.
We are, yeah. It's one of those things, it's you can kind of plan your months out, plan the rest of your quarter, but sometimes you just, like we say, you kind of have to pivot and take an opportunity when it falls into your lap. So that's what we're doing. We're figuring it out.
Yeah, I think with business and just life in general, I think it's, those who pivot, those who are willing to be fluid and adjust are the ones that win the game.
Yep, I agree.
So anyways, with that, let's jump into our topic for the day. What do you got, Alex?
Yeah, so we've kind of been getting this question a lot recently. A lot of people are kind of curious, should they start their own podcast? What are the steps to starting a podcast? And basically, just how do you do it? I think a lot of people are trying to get into the space, get into just connecting with other people in the same space. So we're kind of going to dive into just how to start a podcast today for everyone who's been wondering.
Yeah. And I love this topic. This is my second podcast now. I had another podcast in the apartment investing space with two old partners that I had for 3 years. So, I've seen a lot of the mistakes that were made, some of the stuff I liked and didn't like from that one. And then I made this one when I broke up with my old partners. And with this one, obviously, there's been some things we've done right, some things that we've learned from. So I feel like, all in all, it's always going to be a learning process, and you're the one that has done a lot of the back end stuff for this podcast, scheduling guests. You were doing all the show notes before, you were publishing on all the different platforms. Now we have Parker, but when we started this one, we had someone out-house, and now it's in-house in terms of the videography, the content, or the editing, and all that sort of stuff. But I think in today's age, with the way everything's going, whether it's social media, podcasts, it's never been easier to market yourself, market your business, and grow an audience, if you would. And so I think, for anyone out there that is an entrepreneur or interested in getting into it, I think podcasting is one of the number one things that you can do.
Yep.
And I don't think this is just for people that think they're good on camera or on a mic. I think that if you are shy, I still think that this could be a really, really good option for you.
Yep.
Because just because you are shy and just because you feel like you might not be the best on camera or you might not be the best on the microphone, that doesn't mean that that's a forever thing. You can literally practice and get those reps in and become good.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like you're born with this or you're not. It's not like that at
Yeah.
all. And I remember my first podcast virtually on the old one. I was like so nervous. I had no idea what I was doing. I was so nervous. And then after dozens and dozens of episodes, I was like, oh, I'm not nervous anymore. Mm-hmm. And then the first time I interviewed a bigger name guest, it was Grant Cardone on the old one.
Yeah.
On the old one, I was nervous.
Yeah.
And then the first time I did an in-person podcast as a guest, I was like, whoa, this is different. It's not on Zoom. I was nervous. And then, you do it over and over and then you're not nervous. And then first time I interviewed a bigger name guest in person, I was nervous. And now I'm like, you know what? This is not a big deal because I just got the reps in, you know?
I think it's with anything, but it's definitely something you can practice, become better. I mean, even if you're shy, I think this might be a good medium for you just because you can do it in the comfort of your own home. You can do it virtually, and it's not like you're in front of a big audience. It's not the same as public speaking or being even at a meetup. Sometimes I think if you're shy, sometimes that can be kind of hard. But this comfort of your own home, you're having a conversation. So you might actually shine. I would just recommend just kind of getting started. I think a lot of people think that you have to have all these things figured out, all this fancy equipment, the whole setup. And it's definitely something you can strive to and have be your goal. But I mean, you can start, you started virtual, you started on, was it Zoom or what did you use when you first started your old one?
Yeah. So actually early on, we didn't even use Zoom. We didn't even have video. It was, there was a platform out there, I forget the name of it, but we were literally audio only. So a guest would log in, I would be logged in with my two partners. They would be virtual as well. And we wouldn't be able to see each other at all. It was all audio. But that's how we started.
Yeah.
And then I would say 25 episodes in, then we went to Zoom. And so then you get the video. And so that was a little bit more of a personal touch. But you're right. You don't need a whole lot. If you are shy, it's you're having conversations with people.
Yep.
You're interviewing them. You're asking them questions. And so really a lot of the spotlight is on the guest, not really you. You're just the one driving the conversation and asking the questions. And so you just start to do that over and over. And eventually you get more and more comfortable. You start to, provide some more input. People start to view you as the expert in the space. And all you're doing is interviewing people and you're just asking them questions that you legitimately have personally, which is cool. Some of the benefits that, a lot of people don't realize, I didn't realize going into starting a podcast would be, one, networking, the networking component of it, right? You have hour-long conversations with all these guests. Most of these guests that I have on are much smarter than I am. They've done bigger things than I have. And so I get to, ask them questions that I have. So not only do I get to learn, but after the hour conversation, it's I've built a genuine connection with this individual and you never know what opportunities or doors that's going to open up to you down the road.
Yeah.
Right? Because someone's been on your podcast, you're going to exchange phone numbers with them. You're going to exchange contact information. If you ever need to hit them up down the road, they're going to answer your phone call.
Yeah.
Because you provided value to them by bringing them on to your podcast, exposing them to a listener base and audience. And so in return, they're going to know who you are. They're going to take your phone call if you ever need anything. And I think that's a powerful thing. The other thing that is cool about the podcast that, a lot of people don't realize is, all these connections that you make, those connections down the road, I'll give you an example. So one thing that I thought of doing recently is I want to start a WhatsApp group and I want to put all the past podcast guests from this podcast in the WhatsApp group. And then any future guests, I want to put them in there. And so I thought, man, eventually we'll have like 400 like really high caliber guests in this WhatsApp group. And just think of the networking opportunities. It's like a value add component for any of the guests that come on. I thought that would be really cool. So that's one thing, like an idea that I had. Wait, here's another one. The content for your social media, the short form stuff, if you do the long form, which is the podcast, and you record it, that's your short form content. You almost don't need to really film short form content. I don't do a whole lot of that anymore.
Yep. I know you used to do a lot more of kind of even like the whiteboard stuff or just short form, but now it's all there for you. So it's just kind of killing two birds with one stone. I think too, just kind of like you alluded to, just with the networking, you never quite know when it's going to come back around. I mean, even a couple guests we've hit up recently, like Mike Taylor, just for some advice. You ended up joining a car club through Clem. Like, just it's cool to see everything really full circle. But yeah, what I would say is, to start, I would first decide like whether you want to do it virtual or in person. Would you recommend like kind of seeing how you have kind of, gone along and transitioned? Like, would you recommend starting virtual? Would you recommend going fully in person to begin with? What would you recommend there?
Yeah, I would say just get started.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be perfect out the gate. The first 20, 30, 40 episodes anyways, you're not going to have a ton of listeners anyways, right?
Yeah.
So why would you have the expectation that you need to be perfect? My first podcast was virtual. I think just start it. So equipment wise, get your equipment down, right? Go get a nice microphone. We use these Shure SM7Bs, but when I started, I used something else. It was just a USB mic. You can buy a really nice USB mic for about $120 on Amazon, plug it right into your computer, log into Zoom, get a little ring light, and start booking guests, So get the equipment, figure out your podcast name, come out with a logo, and then from there, you did all the stuff with the Libsyn. You can use Libsyn. You can use Buzzsprout. There's a lot of different like platforms out there. They're called syndications or syndicators. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's actually a lot. They make it pretty user friendly. It's a lot easier than I think some people would think. Just get a logo. You can just create one. There's a lot of, even Canva, you can create something super basic. You can always update it later too. So if you want to go back and do something else, but create a logo. I think Canva is awesome just kind of for the everyday user. And then we use Buzzsprout. So essentially you just create a login and a profile. And what you do is you just upload the audio files, the logo, the show notes, and it basically filters it out to all the different Apple, Spotify, all the different platforms. Yes, thank you. And they make it really easy. And really, like, if you ever make a mistake or if you ever need to edit anything, you can go back and do that. Like, there's been a couple times, I've been reading it, I made a typo, or like if you want to change episode title, anything like that, they make it easy and they will update that across all the platforms. So it's not as scary as it seems. Just kind of get it out there. You could always go back and fine tune it. Buzzsprout, there probably are some other ones. I will say, I think Apple does have like a 1 to 2 day review period.
Yeah.
So if you're on a tight deadline, just keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
We, I think, announced like we're going to go live this day just, because we had kind of it'd been an idea for a while and we were just like, we just got to do it. We just got to get it out there. So just keep that in mind. If you have a date you want to launch, there is a few day review period for Apple. And then the only other thing that I would probably recommend, we heard this from a few different people, but when we launched, we had 5 episodes at once. Mm-hmm. And from a couple people who told us this, it's just going to help the algorithm. And if you launch with 1 episode, people can just listen to 1. Mm-hmm. But if you launch with 5, people are most likely going to listen to the 5. So I think that helps your stats and your algorithm because people are listening to 5 in a row. So that was one thing that I hadn't necessarily heard, but it was recommended from a few people.
If you love real estate investing, passive income, and tax benefits, but don't have the time, my company, Summers Capital, is buying boutique hotels right now. We source the deals, we renovate the properties, and we even handle all the day-to-day management, making it truly hands-off for our investors. If you want to learn more to see if we can help you, visit summerscapital.com/invest to book a call with our team. Again, that's summerscapital.com/invest. Now back to the show. Yeah, and it's the same reason why like a Netflix series, they don't just release one. Sometimes they release like the whole series at once, right?
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of Netflix. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and then because then people will just like binge the whole series essentially.
Got it. And so if you think about it, if you drop 5 episodes on day one, you're going to have 5 times the amount of downloads than if you had just dropped one. And you're also you have a higher likelihood of retaining a new listener if you have multiple episodes. So I think that's a good point. And then also I think it's important to remember or to figure out, what is your format going to be? Are you going to interview people, or are you going to do a lot of solo stuff? For me, the solo stuff is cool, but I actually prefer interviewing people. I like having conversations with people. That's how I learn. So figure that out. And then what's the frequency of the podcast? Are you going to drop 1 episode a week? Are you going to do 1 every 2 weeks? Are you going to do 2 a week? So figure that out. I think as a good baseline starting out, I would do 1 a week. So figure out what day you want to drop it on. I think Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays are good, or maybe a Monday. But keep in mind, whatever date you pick, make sure that you drop an episode same date, same time, so there's consistency there. If you do Monday, which my first podcast was a Monday morning, sounds great, but a lot of federal holidays fall on a Monday, and so most people don't want to be worrying about scheduling a podcast on a holiday. At least I know.
Yeah, and then you're just kind of. Sometimes depending on, how far ahead you are, you might be kind of getting stuff together over the weekend. So choose a day. I think stay consistent. That's one thing like we've really tried to do with the consistency. I think it's just, then you build that trust, you build that rapport with your listeners. They're like, okay, they know what to expect. They know that they're going to be expecting one that day. And so, choose a day, figure out kind of what format you would like to do. I think, we've kind of evolved as we've gone. I mean, it's been the same as far as interviewing guests, but we've added the Saturday edition, which I think has been a successful edition. I think it's sometimes from my experience, like sometimes I want to listen to an hour-long episode. Sometimes I want something more like bite-sized, like 15 minutes. So I think it's been a good addition. But just staying consistent with the day. You can like even put that on when you upload all your information into Buzzsprout or whatever you use. You say weekly, bi-weekly. I would even like put it in the show notes like, hey, every Tuesday or every Thursday, we'll have a new episode.
What is the best way to get guests on?
It's been a combination. Like I would say it was more difficult at the beginning just because like if you don't really have a track record, you have a social media presence, so that's been helpful. And I think that's, kind of been the catalyst. Yeah, thank you. The catalyst for a lot of the guests. But at the beginning, you're like, hey, come on the podcast, but you don't have any episodes. So now it's a little bit more of a snowball effect. We get them just from, people reaching out to us. Past guests sometimes will have different ideas for us. Social media. I mean, that's another reason. I know we've already kind of, touched on in past episodes, your social media presence, but I think creating content, if you're not already, it's going to go hand in hand with the podcast. You connect with people on Instagram and a lot of them will reach out wanting to come on. So I think having that social media presence along with the podcast, it's going to go hand in hand. It's going to come full circle. But I would say, social media, just meeting people out in person, and then past guests, I try to reach out to them, and a lot of them have different ideas and they'll connect us. So it's just kind of been the more episodes that we put out, I think the more it's just kind of becoming like
snowball. But if you're brand new, like everyone has like a certain network.
True.
So start with your network. find people within your network that you want to bring on.
Yep.
They'll come on. And then make a list of all the people that you want to bring on and go find their contact information. Everyone has a website. Everyone has a social media. DM them, go to their website, and just tell them who you are and say, hey, I have a brand new podcast. I'd love to have you on as a guest.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a lot of no's,
Yeah.
but like 30%, 40% of people will say
Yeah.
yes. And you would be surprised how easy it is to get certain guests on. Like I think with my first podcast, it was virtual. It was like episode 22, we landed Grant Cardone.
Yeah.
It was just right time, right place. The pandemic had just dropped. And I think him and Elena at the time were like, oh, we're just going to go on all these different podcasts. And so that's what they did. And we just caught them at the right place, right time. But I say all this in that it is relatively easy to get guests on. So even if you are brand new, you don't have a lot of downloads, like don't let that hold you back. Just go out there, be aggressive. It's a numbers game like anything in life. But I think, after that, it's like stay consistent.
Yep.
You're not going to get a ton of downloads off the bat. Don't get discouraged. Make sure that you chop up the highlights of these of the podcast, put them out there on social media. It doesn't have to be your own personal social media. You could create a new Instagram and TikTok for the podcast specifically, and you can just start putting out content. And it's going to start off slow, but it will grow, and people will start listening, and they will start sharing it with their friends. Listen to yourself, and see how you can get better. Don't talk over guests, and just get in there and just let it rip.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect day one. Shoot, I'm not perfect today, right?
Yeah.
But it is what it is. Like, you just do it over and over. You're going to make mistakes. And at the end of the day, no one cares. As long as you put out content, you bring on good guests. You don't need to be the perfect speaker. You don't need to be super well spoken. I'm not, but we make it work.
Yeah.
Look at Joe Rogan. This is a perfect example. Joe Rogan has done 3 podcast episodes every single week for 14 years, and he has never missed one. And if you go back to like Joe's first year, his second year, it was not perfect. He didn't have the great equipment. His speaking ability was not what it is today. Yeah. And today, he's able to get presidents to come on. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. All these people are willing to come hang out with Joe and go on his podcast because of the platform he's built. His ESPN stuff, all that stuff that he has, the $50 million Spotify contract that he has, that's all because of his podcast and because he literally said, fuck it. I'm going to put out 3 episodes a week for 14 years. I don't care what anyone else says. And no one else is willing to do that, but he did. And now he's bearing the fruits of his labor. And so that is a perfect example for anyone out there. It's like, that is the power of the podcast. You said it earlier, like all these guests that are willing to come on now, because we've built an environment that is conducive with guests wanting to come hang out. They want to put their name out there. And so because of that, now I have access to all these folks, to where if we didn't have this podcast, that would not be the case.
Yeah. And like you said, it doesn't need to be anyone big, especially to start. I think some of the best conversations sometimes are not necessarily the biggest people. It's just anyone who can have a conversation, has an interesting or cool story. That's where you got to start. And sometimes I think those are fan favorites. So just, anyone that you come in contact with, good conversation, good story, just bring them on. And again, it's going to be practice. So you're going to get better at interviewing. You're going to get maybe it's like some of the little kinks out of the way. And then it's just going to be more smooth sailing. I know that you've kind of said, even you feel like you've kind of gotten better at like interviewing and asking questions. And it just takes practice. So do you feel like kind of you've learned even from this podcast? I know you had one before, but do you feel like you've kind of...
Oh, 100%. And it gives me confidence now when I go have conversations with folks off of camera, out and about. It could be anything, right? I'm having a conversation with an investor, I'm a client or whatever, a lender, or a complete stranger. It gives me so much more confidence to know that I'm going to navigate this conversation because of all these conversations that I've had through this podcast, my old podcast. And so, it's all reps, right? And that's the beauty of it. You're not going to be perfect out the gate. I want to talk a little bit more on just marketing it. So obviously the social media, chop up the highlights, but also if you have an email list, right, from your meetup, if you have a meetup, you can start blasting it out to your email list, and that's another way to get the listeners. So anytime you have a new episode, blast it out there, social media. But yeah, and it will grow. It will grow. Even my last one, we didn't have much of a social media presence, but we were consistent and we did it all the time, and it continued to grow. And also, here's the other thing. People that don't listen, even though they don't listen to any episodes, but they see you putting out an episode every single week, every single Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the morning, like clockwork, they're going to start to view you eventually as the expert in that field. And they're going to start to trust you because you're just showing them that level of consistency, which ultimately leads to trust. And people do business with those they know, like, and trust. And then I would say lastly, like, if you are in real estate investing right now or business, like, eventually, you're going to need investors. You're going to need capital. You're going to need, to sell stuff, right? And so what better way than to have a podcast than to do those things, and it's a great way to drive revenue to your stuff. People watch these 30-second TikToks, they watch these 60-second reels. It's very hard to build trust with those short clips, but the purpose of those reels is to drive people over to your podcast. And if you have a good long form podcast, people start listening to hours and hours of you speak and interview high level guests. They are going to start to trust you over and over time. And those are the folks that really convert over to customers. And so, I don't know, I just think looking back, starting a podcast is one of the best things I ever did. The first one I thought, man, this has got to be perfect. This is my old podcast. And I thought everything's gonna be perfect. But in all reality, looking back, it's like, no, like, it was not perfect. We didn't have a ton of downloads. We made a lot of mistakes. But all those reps got me to where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning. Like, this is just the beginning. And I think I hear people say all the time, like, I'm too late to the game with the podcasting, but that's not true. I believe like podcasting is just getting started, and it's going to continue to grow. More and more people are moving over to the podcast space in terms of like listening. People are driving to work, they're going to the gym, they listen, and people reach out all the time, which is really cool. It's like, hey, I'll like be in an airplane or like at the gym. People are like, hey, I just want to say I love your podcast. Wanted to introduce myself, and I'm like, that is so cool, and I appreciate everyone for listening. And I'm always very appreciative of it. And I always tell people like, if there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know.
Yeah.
But honestly, like it's there's some feel good that comes out of knowing, hey, like you are helping others and you're helping inspire others to do whatever your thing is. And so that's another aspect that is pretty cool. But all in all, I think it's something that everyone should look into. A lot of people are willing to go on social media and put out content. Not a lot of people are willing to do the long form and do the podcast. It is a lot of work, but if you do it over and over and you stay consistent, you can monetize it, and it will lead to a lot of opportunities for you that you did not know was possible. It's
all about getting started. And I think you have to remember, no one's listening. Like, you're listening to it with more of a, you're your own worst critic, So even if you listen to a podcast, you hear someone slip up or mess up, like, you don't really care, right? If it's someone else. So you just have to remember, no one cares as much as you think they do, to be honest. Just get out there, put yourself out there, and you'll get better. And just don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think, we're our own worst critics. And
And one other thing I want to throw in there, this is a mistake from a lesson learned. I won't call it a mistake. A lesson learned from my old podcast was that one was specifically about apartment investing.
Yeah.
And when you think about your podcast and the brand you want it to be, the topic, apartment investing was cool, but after 100 episodes of just talking apartment investing, I got bored. I got bored of interviewing the same people. It's the same conversation every time. So if I'm getting bored, the listener's probably getting bored. And so with this one, I wanted to be more broad, and I wanted to be like more focused with entrepreneurship and real estate investing. However, I want to be able to bring on guests from all walks of life. And so with this one, I can do that. So I don't get bored, right? And so I would definitely consider that when you're coming up with the podcast. Do something that allows you to be flexible in terms of like what kind of guests you can bring on, what kind of conversations you can have, because at the end of the day, you don't want to get bored as the host. Yeah,
that's a good point. I think it's good to have your focus, but then keep it broad so that way you don't like pigeonhole yourself later.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Absolutely. Well, with that, this concludes the Saturday edition. She's Alex Johnson. I'm Rich Summers. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.